Are you ready to change your mind? Are you ready to rethink the truth about reality? It's time to go on a journey into this weird world. All right, so welcome back to This Wyrd World. My name is Tansy Bajent, and I am the host of this show. And today I am supported in this conversation that we're going to have with two beautiful women, one who you will have seen before, Jacqueline, and one who you will be being introduced to on this show today, which is Charlie. And I'm so excited to welcome you both to the podcast, the YouTube. So thank you so much for being with me.
Thanks, Tansy. Glad to be here.
So the theme of today is going to be about altered states of consciousness. Now, for many of those listening or watching, this may seem like something that you haven't maybe had much relationship with as a language, as a term. Or maybe you have, maybe you are deeply immersed in plant medicine or journeying. But for those that aren't, this is really about recognizing or kind of deepening into what it means to be in a different state of mind than what our usual reality gives us. So just like our everyday reality, we can see that as being a kind of natural consciousness or just our everyday consciousness. Now, when we talked about altered states, it's when we are descending or deepening or changing that consciousness to experience different things. And it's interesting to see whether that might be illusionary or imaginal or real, but in a different sense, more metaphysical. So I'm excited to have this conversation today because we're going to talk about what it means really to have an altered state or to be in an altered state of consciousness and the different access points perhaps of getting there. And so if you feel that you know, then this is going to be a wonderful conversation because each of us are going to be bringing a different point of view or maybe the same, but we're going to have a conversation. And if you don't know, then hopefully by the end you will understand the kind of inner workings of what that means a little bit more. Because through this conversation, I also want us to actually articulate the experience that we've had so we can really help those who haven't gone into an altered state of consciousness to have an almost tactile experience of what that would be like. And I think all three of us can speak to that and possibly from different perspectives. So everyone, it gives you as the listener or watcher for you to understand a little bit more about a difference of opinion or a difference of feeling. So when you go into your own altered state of consciousness, if you do, then you'll have this sort of plethora of information and support as you go, hearing different perspectives before. So that was a long introduction. So actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to start because I'm excited to introduce Charlie to everyone, but because she's the new being in this space, I'm going to let Jacqueline just introduce herself briefly, because for those who haven't seen her before and don't know her yet, then she will also give her introduction, and then we'll land more with you, Charlie. So does that feel like a good way around?
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you, Tansy. And yes, my name is Jacqueline Allen, and I'm primarily an acupuncturist. And it's such a broad term. What it encompasses is really the depth of mind, body, spirit as a whole. So bridging all of the layers of human experience, and it really encompasses all of that. I'm also an astrologer, and what I've called myself as a soul alchemist. So doing deepening work with those that we've dove in together through their astrology chart and doing ongoing work together and exploration. So I'm really excited to be here, and yeah, I'll let Charlie introduce herself.
Thanks, Jackie, and thanks, Tansy. So I'm thrilled to be here today having this conversation. I can't wait to dive in. A little about me. I relevant to this topic. I started exploring altered states of consciousness really young. I was a weird kid. I was often invited to overnights with girlfriends because I conducted seances really well and saw ghosts and asked my mother for a tarot deck when I was about 10. So my journey with the metaphysical and ceremony began really early in my life. And at this point, I am a priestess and astrologer. I am ordained with a federally recognized Wiccan church here in the United States. And I also participate in shamanic experiences. I'll talk later about the sun moon dance, which happens all over the world, but the group that I do it with works in upstate New York here in the United States. I also work with plant medicine. I do a lot of astral journeying, meditative work. So I have a pretty broad depth of practice as well, and I'm thrilled to dive in. So thanks for having me.
Thank you, Charlie. It's just so wonderful to have you joining us. And I sort of say us because Jacqueline, you've been commandeered as like one of my co-hosts. So I love that. So it's so wonderful to have you and to feel just that experience that you were introduced to the metaphysical or this altered space from a very young age and sought that out yourself. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about that. How were your parents in relationship to that? Are they quite immersed in magic or anything like that? Or were you sort of unusual in your want to pursue that path?
My household was pretty agnostic growing up. We weren't religious, really. There was a lot of space for exploration, and my mother was really supportive. She said, "Okay, you would like a tarot deck? Let's find you a tarot deck." When I was a child, I think Ouija boards were pretty common. You could buy them at toy stores. So I told my mom I wanted one, and she said, "Okay, go and get one." She was definitely spiritual, but not religious, I would say. She passed in 2002, but toward the end of her life, she definitely had a relationship with what she viewed as angelic beings that were ready to receive her into the other side. So that was a really beautiful part of her end of life process. So yeah, my family was actually really supportive, and there was space for me to explore that, which was such a blessing. I think a lot of folks don't experience that type of support from family, especially as a child. So I have a lot of gratitude to my mother in particular for supporting me in the journey that began so early in my life.
And I know that I have this question a lot, so I'm going to ask this to you, and then I'm going to put it to Jacqueline as well. But when you started out, like what was the sort of steps? Like if you had to isolate these moments of time where you felt that you wanted to go deeper or you were being called to do something, like was that triggered by like seeing ghosts and kind of wanting to figure that out? Or was it like, I'm just interested in that point where you are realizing that there is something beyond, and how were you led to deepen into that? What was your kind of specific journey in that way? What kind of tools and techniques did you kind of follow to deepen that connection?
I'll say that sort of the first 20 years or so of my life, I felt really uncertain about the path forward. I think that's normal when we're young. I didn't even realize that there was a whole community of people that engaged in the type of practices that I was drawn to. I moved here to Washington State when I was 19 to go to college, and that marked a really profound turning point for me because suddenly I had access to spiritual community, to training, to teachers and mentors. And just a few years after that, I met one of my long-term mentors, Reverend Paul Byral, who wrote the Master Book of Herbalism. I was a student of his from 1999 until he died at the end of 2021. And I'm now one of the caretakers of the work that he created in his lifetime, which is such an honor and a gift and a responsibility. But I think discovering community, starting to learn that there were others like me who were drawn to connect with the unseen, to the realm of spirit, to divinatory practice, things like that was really profound. And then starting to discover teachers and mentors that could support me in that journey and provide some structure. The Wiccan group that I'm involved with has a formal mystery school training program. So I entered that when I was 23. So 23 years ago, half my lifetime ago, which is amazing. And having that structure and access to mentors and others who had been doing this work for decades was really pivotal for me. And the journey continues. There's been so many moments in my life that have led me more and more deeply into the work. In 1999, when I met Reverend Paul, I also co-founded a ritual theater company based here in Seattle and started diving deeply into working with mythology. And I have a theater background. I started acting on stage when I was 5 or 6 years old, but getting to do it in the context of sacred time and sacred space and that ritual container that we create when we're presenting theatrical work, especially work that draws from such potent material like mythology, was really special. And that has been a huge part of my training as well. The storytelling, but also offering my physical body as a vessel for characters and archetypes and the stories to live and breathe again has been a huge part of the journey.
Oh, I love that expression. Like, just where you said there as well about giving your body over as a conduit to archetypes to live through you. That's a really powerful way of thinking about that and embodying it. But that's so fascinating, and I'm really glad that you brought in that that introduction to school, to teacher, to mentor. And I think that's a really powerful piece for many people, is to know that there is a community, a collective around you supporting you to grow, that you don't have to do it on your own, and they can help guide you in different ways. Yes, that's wonderful to hear your journey. So thank you for sharing that. And Jacqueline, what about you? What was your experience?
I just feel so grateful to have you both in my life right now, because I had a remarkably different exposure and path into, what I'll just refer to as altered states of consciousness. And I grew up in the Midwest, and there wasn't any support system for experimenting or exploring, or at a young age. I was very curious at a young age, the world beyond what we were given. I questioned everything. It was, I would hear these things from the adults. They said, high school is the best 4 years of your life. And my whole body would just go, no, like that's not the truth. Like, what is, what's beyond what they're feeding us? And so I always questioned. And as a young girl, I would constantly use this phrase: things are infinitely big as they are small. I mean, I would stare up at the galaxy and the stars at night, and the next day in science class, would be looking at a picture of the nervous system in our textbook, or microorganisms in a petri dish, and I'm like, oh, it inward, outward. But I didn't have language for it. When I discovered Hermes Trismegistus and the language behind that, I said, oh, there is world here that I am connected to, but I was never guided towards that. And so I actually fell into exploration with my tribe of people as a young teenager. And it was kind of like the blind leading the blind. There was a little bit in each of us as kids that wanted to know more, wanted to feel more. But where I came from, plant medicine fell into the bag of, drugs, and drugs are bad. And there's no growth or potential there. So it was always this underground exploration, but I myself was always drawn to psychedelics. And my journey, I think because of the lack of support I had and the preconceived notions that were in my cultural field, I wasn't set up in a supportive way. And I actually experienced a lot of trauma in my journey and my exploration. I lost my best friend when I was 17, and it induced a level of fear in my body that I had to meet. It's part of my journey. And so since then, I feel like I've been rediscovering myself. I feel like I was sort of really the myth of Persephone is what speaks to me the most strongly, where I just feel that I was yanked to the bottom of the bottom of the bottom. And then I've slowly been rediscovering. And it's not really until recently in the last, 5, 6, 7 years that I'm really finding my community and really feeling and knowing like I am not alone, that there have been journeyers and explorers for eons of time, and that there are teachers and that there are mentors and there are spaces where we can really invoke the medicine that I always knew these substances to be. I always felt deep in my soul that there was medicine here, and I never bought that cultural paradigm story that was fed to me. Even in the trauma that I experienced, I knew something deep inside of me knew that this was medicine. So I've had a huge magnitude of growth in the last year and a half, I'd say. And I really feel like I'm on this outward edge of this really deep journey that I had to experience in the way that I did. And now I'm in a space that you're describing, Charlie and even Tansy, from a young age, where it's like, oh, there's support systems, there's group, there's exploration. So I actually feel really empowered to step into these realms again. Acknowledging my past, but being fully present, and from that place of love. I really feel that fear being transmuted. And so I'm just so grateful to know you guys, and to know that there are so many, listeners who are experiencing similar things or have been on similar paths. So yeah, my journey was was quite a bit darker, I would say. But it feeds every part of the work that I do. Feeds every part of it. My one-on-one work with my clients, in the acupuncture treatment room, and my astrology sessions. I have seen and experienced and traveled through realms that I probably wouldn't have chosen to go to, but because I've journeyed that, I'm fed by an immensity of bodily knowing. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you, Jackie, for being so honest and vulnerable there as well, with sharing that of your experience, which I know was incredibly difficult. And it's so powerful for you to share it here. And I'm really grateful that you brought that. And it really speaks to this want in so many of us, actually, to kind of to reach for something deeper. There's this sort of deep inherent knowing or need to explore, to experience. And I think for so many people, it's shut down. And those that try and attempt to do it, to explore through medicine or drugs, as it's known, as many of them are known, or other, or Ouija boards, or doing any of these things that are out of the confines of what normal people do and what is safe. If anything happens that kind of essentially goes wrong, there is some kind of sense that, well, you've done it to yourself because you were like seeking too hard. But I always feel that when you have that seeking need inside, there is always this, it's almost like what you were saying with the myth of Persephone. It's like you, and the same with the Fool card at the beginning of the tarot. People will call you a fool, and you have to have a fool. There has to be something, because you're kind of stepping off the cliff. You have to almost push to say, I want something more, and I'm kind of willing to meet whatever monster, whatever kind of threat, whatever difficulty I confront, because the truth is, the wisdom, the whatever comes through that, I know is important for my growth. And with every one of these sort of great teachers, there is some sacrifice. There is something that must be endured, must be lived through. Like we hear about Odin, who gives his eye and then hangs himself from a tree to gain the wisdom of the runes, this ancient magical language. We don't receive things just because we necessarily want them. We have to show that we are willing to sacrifice, to step into, and to meet whatever we get confronted with, because that is part of our growth and our journey. And everything does have an element of kind of suffering in order to birth, beauty and new life. And that's the same with childbirth. It's like, my gosh, could it be anything more horrific, to give birth? But it's like you go through this suffering and destruction and feeling of like almost death, and sometimes death. But then what comes out of that is life. And it's like there is a passage that must be kind of met with, and that's where so much of the growth comes. And I think that some of the greatest healers, teachers I know I think all of them, we've all endured some level of deep suffering that has taken us there. And that's sort of part of the Chiron, the wounded healer. And I'm interested, Charlie, for in your experience, if there is anything that you want to share in terms of your own journey and what you were confronted with that was challenging.
My partner and I gave a talk at a conference earlier this year on initiatory experiences. The ones that we work towards intentionally and choose, such as in a spiritual tradition or a formal training. And then there are initiatory experiences that just happen to us. And that's the death of someone we love, or the birth of a child, or there's this division of my life before this experience and my life after. And I've certainly confronted a lot of those circumstances in my life as well, both chosen initiations, things that I've worked towards for a decade or more, and then definitely an assortment of ones that I didn't choose that changed me. And I loved what you were naming, Tansy, around that the suffering is inherent. It's part of it. It's part of the human experience. Persephone certainly suffered in her journey to the underworld. I have a very intimate relationship with Inanna, who is the Sumerian Mesopotamian equivalent of Persephone. And again, there's a lot of suffering in that myth. Inanna makes it to the underworld, and the queen of the underworld puts her on a hook for 3 days and 3 nights and says, you need to experience this. And what a horrific thing to endure. So I think that the suffering is an inherent part of the journey. And something that Isaiah and I talked about in our talks is that we really can't remove that element of suffering from the experience, because that's ultimately where the potency of the transformation lies, is getting through that. And it's a bit of a cliche, but I always think of the only way out is through. And I love that. We get to these portals, these liminal spaces of, well, when I pass through here, I'm not going to be the same. And most times there isn't an option to go back. We're there and we need to step forward. We need to be the fool with our little knapsack stepping off the cliff, the little dog barking at our heels. We have to embrace that. And suffering is, inherently, none of us enjoy that. None of us want to suffer, right? But I think that all of us here, and probably a lot of your listeners, would agree that the suffering is part of the process. We are the grist for the mill. We are the materia in the mortar and pestle being broken down so that something new can come forth. So I loved what you shared, Tansy, and I fully agree, and I'd be interested to hear what you all think.
Well, I loved your response. I love that, speaking to it as like the initiatory journey. And I think it's so powerful to speak to this, because I think a lot of people don't speak to the need for suffering, or the necessary part of suffering in one's life to move us through into new experiences, into new chapters. And it's also like the death card in the tarot, which, people think of death being at the end, but it's not the end. You must go through it. And the more that you resist death, resist change, the more you suffer. So the suffering is endured or lengthened when we fail to kind of keep going, where we sort of get stuck in the suffering, and then we're suffering because we're suffering. When actually the way through is just to is often to just keep going. That this too will pass, and that will emerge you, like you say, into a new way of, into a new chapter, into a new version of yourself, into a new way of being. And I think that really speaks to psychedelics, right? When you've taken something, you are in it for the ride. You are going in, and the only way through is through. The only way out is through. And so what you spoke perfectly to the suffering that we experience in our life. And I speak to a lot of clients about this. When they're in the suffering, it couldn't be worse. But there is a through. But you need to, we just need to continue on this path to get through it. And I don't think there's enough talk about that in our society. We kind of turn to the light, turn to angels, turn to ways to free ourselves from the suffering, when actually it's so often the case of just having to be with it. And yeah, I personally have gone through so many periods of suffering, and each one has changed me in a different way. And you can't often see how it changes you until afterwards. It's like you just have to trust the process and the healing and the growth and what is emerging. And the one that really set me onto my healing path, like as a full-time occupation, was having a major head injury. And I've heard it from so many people. One woman, who went into paralysis, and she was told she could never walk again. And she healed herself through that paralysis, because she saw that it was part of her journey. It wasn't going to be the end. She wouldn't let it be the end. And that was something she walked through. So I just love where we've come to in this conversation, because I think this is a really powerful piece and leads us into altered states of consciousness, because it speaks to also when you take medicine and your state of consciousness is altered. And a lot of people fear that as they would death, because they know that something is going to be changed. And then actually we can speak to, you just need to stay with it, just keep going through it, just being with the experience. But in terms of that, I want to ask you both, just if you could share a profound experience of an altered state of consciousness, and if you can kind of describe as much as you can what that felt like to someone that maybe has never experienced it. So maybe if we start with maybe altered state of consciousnesses, either through medicine or through something that is kind of almost physically distorting, rather than maybe journeyings at this time. So whoever wants to lead on that one.
Go ahead, Jackie.
Yeah, this is an interesting question. Again, just following up with kind of where I am personally at in my journey. I haven't myself had a lot of group supported experiences, a lot of ceremonialized experiences. A lot of my journeys have come on somewhat spontaneously, and I'll speak to that a little bit, but I really want to bring in this concept, what you both are speaking to so well, and one of my teachers calls suffering well. Can we suffer well? And it immediately takes me to the full embodiment of the earth. And we know in our bones, in our bodies, in our beings, that every natural force that occurs in the earth around us is needed and necessary. We see devastation, and we see wildfires, and we see rain, and we might personally feel afflicted by an experience that we're really close to, but when we feel the earth, we know it's necessary. And so I invite my clients often to trust that, one, tears are medicine always, no matter how many times they've come, no matter what reason this way, it's just medicine. And to really receive that in without needing to know, wait, why am I crying right now? The body knows, and it might be from a long, long time ago that those tears are just now able to emerge. So acknowledging the medicine and the necessity in all of these energies. We've learned, I feel like, in our culture to crave the sun, to crave the sunlight, to be in warmth and all of this, but we know deep in our bones that we need winter and that we need these transformations. So for me personally, I have experienced in my life spontaneously induced, I'll just say like entheogenic type realities. So a very sudden shift in the way that I'm perceiving the world around me. And usually that comes with a heightened sense of emotional experience and a heightened sense of energy in and around me. And because I've been through what I've been through, and I experimented at a young age with psychedelics, I don't fear the change when it shows up. But it has been rather intense to not know why, to not have that answer as to why is this happening. But for me, when I experience and come into those shifted realities, my hearing is heightened. I can hear things in other rooms that I wouldn't normally, or, I can, track animals out in the woods better than I would if I wasn't in that heightened awareness. It becomes really, really hard to be in the world because I feel like I can feel everybody. So going to the grocery store or the gas station becomes almost impossible because I'm literally feeling everything around me. So the longest I've ever been transported into something like that was probably about 7 or 10 days. And luckily I'm in a committed partnership with my partner. We've been together 11 years, and he also experiences and explores his own journeying. So I have safe space to communicate this, because it can be rather shocking and jarring. And, if shared with someone who hasn't had their own experiences, it can be rather confusing. But for me, I notice my heightened emotional state as well. Everything is just amplified. So it becomes really important for me to take care of me in the simplest and the smallest and the most mundane of ways. And then allowing, grief to come as it always does, a surge of my own confusion and disorientation and trying to reground myself. Because I've found ways to support myself in processing these experiences, I'm no longer afraid of them. But I do feel a deep, I don't know if responsibility is the right word, responsibility to myself, but a deep commitment to myself to continue to question when, where, why, how, so that I can understand myself better and my consciousness better. And the ways in which, for me, the veil of reality really is so thin. I have a lot of mutable signs in my astrology chart, and I don't know if that's one of the ways this comes in, but for me, the veil of reality really is a lot thinner than other souls that I've met. But I'm realizing more and more that I'm definitely not alone, and that it's something that can be nourished and supported and honored, and so I'm on my path of embracing who I am and who I am fully, and connecting with the spirit realm and with other ways of perceiving and existing from a really intentional space. So yeah.
Thank you for speaking to that. Again, just as I said at the beginning, to have all of these different perspectives and experiences, I think is so profound and important for people to hear, and for us to hear as well, of just, you don't need to be on anything to have distortion in your reality. And I was going to speak to that in terms of being sensitive when you are, I guess, doing work with people. That's a slight altered state of reality where we are holding space and we are kind of in a container, and you are amplifying what you can feel and sense in a way that is not just your normal way of being. But for you kind of have that happens spontaneously and to a much bigger level. that is uncontrollable. And so it's so fascinating to hear that, because I haven't heard of that many people having that experience. And so it's wonderful to have it here shared. What I wanted to speak to, I could just hear what my audience might be thinking. And when you said about listening to your spirit guides, so this is a slight deviation. What do you mean by that? And what is that experience? And where do you speak to them? Do you see them? Do you see them in your mind? Do you communicate with them? What is your experience, if you can go there?
Yeah, I don't see much visually. I feel a lot, and I know in my body when I'm being held and supported, and I have a really strong sense of connecting to an original intention. So when I find myself in these suffering states or these darker places where the confusion and, fears, doubts, shame, grief start to emerge, I can connect with the intention that I've set for myself. And I can know in that depth that I'm being held. And it's a much different place than, let's say, when I was a teenager and the blind was leading the blind, and we didn't even use that word intention. And, there was no sense of a sacred container. That fear and that suffering that set up, I couldn't remember why I'd started it. Why am I here? Why am I doing this to myself? And so for me, as I've developed my relationship to spirit in the healing since my best friend's death and me evolving into the practitioner that I've become, I maintain a strong connection to spirit, even in the treatment room, so that when these amplified sensations arise, I don't hold them as just my own, because they're not just my own. And so because and really, animals come to me a lot. Definitely my best friend has been with me since her death, and really the energy of the earth and the energy of the cosmos. And so I can really feel that support, and I feel it so strongly, and I've connected it to it so well. I can't deny that it's there, even in these really hard to digest experiences, because I've made that relationship. I've really cultivated it. And so as something emerges, I feel that spiritual support to safely explore. And I don't feel that there are 100% safe places for me to explore. I feel like I've, had to really care and tend to myself as I deepen my relationship to myself. And so, yeah, there's a lot of judgment and confusion out there in the world about the ways that we experience life. And so the more that I maintain that relationship, even through the cards, the tarot, and feeding and fueling, the messages that I'm receiving and talking back to spirit, the more I feel like spirit talks back to me. It's not as concrete as seeing, bodies or spirits per se, but it's very felt. It's very felt.
Thank you so much for speaking to that. And you helped describe it perfectly. And in a way that is very, I think could relate to many people who are going through this journey and can relate to it in that way. And I think we hear about working with spirit guides and all of these things. It's like, well, what does that actually mean? What is the actual experience of that? And what is the actual experience of moving into, becoming a healer? Like, we've had to endure, you have to learn, you kind of have to be with, you have to be tested. And I loved what you said about cultivating relationship with. And I speak to a lot of my clients about that, is that, if you can cultivate, often they've come to me when they are, in trauma, and we bring them out of the trauma. But then we talk about cultivating the relationships that keep you connected or keep you safe. So when you go into moments of difficulty, you've already cultivated that relationship and you know where to go. And I think that's a really important piece, like especially with a lot of the medicines I've done, for example, like DMT and things like that, which kind of rocket you out of your body, of this consciousness. It's a completely altered state of consciousness and you have no idea who you are. Even in that kind of experience, when you come back, to have those grounding abilities to have that to come back to remember how to reground yourself in who you are, remembering how to reconnect, to bring the integration of the experience back with you, rather than for it just to cut you loose, and then you've kind of, you know, your sense is like lost again. And that's the same with trauma. It's the same of going in and like into this space where you could feel that you are in a void. It's so helpful to go to kind of willingly, or when it happens, to sort of embrace it, because you know that there is that connection because you've cultivated it. So I would always recommend, especially before anyone does any plant medicine like ayahuasca, anything, is to first cultivate a relationship with the cosmos, with source, with a support, whether that's through meditation, whether that's through spirit guide journeying, whatever that is. It's like cultivate that first, because the ayahuasca is going to be the initiation, and you need to be supported and rooted in order to come back to something. So yeah, I really thank you so much for articulating it so clearly. And Charlie, so I'll ask you the same question, but feel free to add or contribute in whatever way you want to what we've both shared. But just interested in your sort of profoundest or deepest experience in terms of that altered state, or just one that you would like to share in detail, if possible.
I love a good story. Yeah, this is fun, Tansy. Great question. So I speak a lot about working with plant allies, and I just have a couple little tiny disclaimers that I always offer to folks, is that I would never recommend to someone that I don't know really well to work with a plant ally, especially one that could have some toxicity to it. I work with plants like belladonna and mandrake that are very toxic, and so you have to be careful. But I also work with ayahuasca, and we need to be really careful in these spaces, not only physically, but spiritually and emotionally. So just do your due diligence and make sure that you're connecting with people that are really experienced and really have your safety first and foremost in mind when you're journeying with these types of potent allies. So that's just my usual little sort of warning / disclaimer, because it's profound medicine, and it's not for everyone at every moment in their life. So just be discerning. I had a plant medicine journey in September of last year with ayahuasca that was definitely the most intense plant medicine journey I've had, and I've had quite a few that have been very intense, so that's saying a lot. I experienced my own death in that ceremony, and as DMT does to us, it gives us perspective from outside of ourself. And I remember a moment of, normally I journey in ayahuasca with my eyes closed, but my eyes were open because I was very physically sick. So I had to know what was going on a little bit. I remember looking down at my own hands and, this tattoo that I've had for years, and not recognizing my own hands, going, whose hands are those? And hearing myself suffering. And there are a lot of ways we can purge in plant medicine experiences. It doesn't just mean to purge into a bucket. Crying is purging, laughing is purging, shivering is purging. There's so many ways. So when we say purge, it can mean a lot of things, but in this case, there was a bucket involved. And I remember hearing the sounds of my body suffering and going, oh my gosh, this woman is she's suffering so much, and just having so much love for myself. From the outside, I was experiencing compassion for my own suffering on a very transpersonal level. And it was really, really profound and really terrifying. And there was a lot of suffering that night. And when I started to come back to myself and come back to my body, and the experience started to settle and integrate, I realized that was one of those moments that we talked about earlier, where there's my life before this experience, and now there's my life after. And just the wisdom that I downloaded in that ceremony was, for me, like years of therapy type of experience. It was profound, and a big part of it was experiencing my own death and witnessing my own suffering, and coming to a place of kind of divine compassion for what I was enduring from the outside. It was almost as if I was sensing something much bigger than myself, and understanding that there is infinite love and there is infinite compassion for us and our suffering. And that is always there, and it's always available to us. And it's just a nice reminder that when we're in those experiences, when we're in the underworld, we do have access, we do have allies, we do have support. We're not alone as we may feel in those moments. I don't think I've ever felt so alone in my life as I did in that ceremony that night. But I wasn't alone. I, like Jackie, I work with allies too. I'm sure you do as well, Tansy. Probably a lot of your listeners do. And for me, anytime I go into ceremony or sacred space or any kind of ritual experience, the first thing I do is acknowledge and invite my allies. And I invite the grandmothers, the grandfathers, Pachamama, Mother Earth, Padre Cielo, Father Sky. I invite my ancestors. I invite the guardians of the four directions. And to me, that's so important when we go into those spaces, because it's so vulnerable and there will be suffering, most likely at some point. And so just knowing that we are held in that container, and that there are people holding space for us in our mundane reality as well. I had a plant medicine experience on Kauai last summer when I met Jackie. It was ayahuasca, and Jackie held profound space for me that night. She stayed up on the beach with me all night and held space and helped me prepare for my journey. And it made the experience a little less scary. Still suffering, still fear. I think that's inherent when we really come to that precipice of the potential for growth and transformation. But knowing that we're held, and that our friends love us, and our families and those who have passed are with us in those experiences, is so important. So belated thank you, Jackie.
That's so beautiful. I remember that night well. Yeah.
Thank you, Charlie, for sharing that in so much detail, and speaking to and giving that disclaimer, and then speaking to bringing the guides, bringing the support around you, like creating what we normally kind of think of as, creating magic. Like we kind of bring those elements around us because for protection when we are creating. But we need that when we are going into the underworld, like you say, when we are going into these spaces where we are going to experience deep transformation. And I think it's really important to find our allies on every level. So it's so beautiful to hear that you two found the ally, in soul form and human form. It's like this person is here, and I do believe that you are given people. There are people there ready to hold and support you in this real world. That's part of their own soul's journey, is to support. And I think all three of us in some way then have, because I know that I have had support with Jackie and she with you, and it's like this beautiful network where and I think when you go into any kind of plant medicine, or when you go into any trauma, to know that you can look up and see the faces of people that you trust inherently, and that's what you were speaking to, Charlie. It's choosing who you're going to do this with, who's holding the space, who's around you, and really feeling into your intuition and saying, can I show up in any way in this space? Because I'm just human, and I may purge, be sick, for those who don't know, and I may cry, anything could come out. And do I feel able to do that in front of these people? Do I feel like I can be authentic and I'm safe? And I think it's a key piece. And then also on those metaphysical realms is like having those underneath support guides of like the spirit guides, and then like even deeper of like the ancestors and the or same, but like however you think of it, and then source or goddess. It's just like these, you have these with you, because also like you had, Charlie, I had that with DMT, of when I came back into my body. So with DMT, it's such an interesting experience because there's no transition. So you take it in a pipe, and it's literally like in an instant, I didn't even have time to kind of breathe. I was gone. I was like catapulted out of my experience. I had no concept of who Tansy was. Um, and whether I kind of kept my eyes closed, but and I kind of met these like alien beings, like the kind of the welcome party, and then just it was just like kind of being in this extraordinary temple where I could see the stars through it. And I was in a kind of arch dream. I was actually in here, but it was like this arch dream, and I could see through the arches. Everything was just transparent, and I could see the stars, and everything was sort of purple beyond, and everything was sort of multi-D. It wasn't 3D, it was like 4D, 5D, just like extending out. And I could see my partner levitating in front of me. But it was just such an interesting experience because I could see and experience it, but I had no concept of who I was. And when I came over, it's like this, you're kind of thrown, and then it's like this reverberation back into reality. So everything kind of was like 4D, and then it would start to 5D dimensions are we in, and it starts to like just slowly come back into kind of physical, like on more material form. And then I kind of breathed, and it was like croaky because I kind of burnt my throat. But so I was like, I don't even know if I breathed the whole time. But then it was the landing back into who I was. It didn't matter that I had friends. It didn't matter that I had a partner. It didn't matter that I had a family. I didn't feel like myself. Tansy was an identity that I no longer felt belonged to me. So her friends, her family, it was literally like I was talking about her in third person. I didn't feel that connection to the human element of her story. And so that's when I was like, I was so grateful to have this additional level where I was connected beyond all of that. But then as I slowly came back in, and I grounded myself back in and actually chose to take back my story, I was like, I want to be Tansy. I will drop back into that ego. I will take back attachment. And that's why I kind of talk about this strange feeling of like people that speak to, transcending your ego, lifting beyond, who you are. And it's like, but when you let your ego go and you let all of that go, you no longer feel, you can kind of feel in the presence of peace and love, but you no longer feel like true love for each other and true joy or true care or true fight, or you're left in this sort of ephemeral space where you don't feel anymore. And so I willingly came back into my body and said, I want to actually, I do want to feel those things. I'm not going to transcend my ego. We're gonna be friends with each other. And so that was a really interesting experience. But it was, so I would say that's why you need both, because you don't know in the experience. You do need the safety of people, but you also need that safety of deeper connection, and you don't know what you're going to need depending on the medicine you take. So kind of it's always that intuition of like building the relationships before, in terms of your guides and your connections, and then moving into a space where you can trust those you're around, and knowing that, and asking for, when you go to a ceremony or anything like that, asking for people that will be there, that can support you, that are there to protect you. We can ask the universe of that. So that was a very long tangent.
That was beautiful, Tansy. It can be the transpersonal that Tansy was so beautifully describing, where Tansy didn't exist for a period of time, and then there was a coming back, and okay, I'll reclaim Tansy. I still want to be here. Ayahuasca certainly has that, but I think it also, in terms of the receptors in the brain that it also activates some of the more personal ones. So it's this interesting personal, transpersonal dance between these two different types of DMT that we can work with. So, wow, what an incredible story, Tansy. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you for listening. And Charlie, I know that you work with running, I think, plant medicine facilitation. You do that. And what is your experience, and what drew you to kind of doing that work? I'm so interested in like taking it to that next level of actually supporting people with going through those journeys, and how that how that feels and works.
Well, I'm pretty new to ayahuasca, and I don't know that I will ever feel ready to facilitate that type of plant medicine experience. I think that if I were going to do so, I would like to train with indigenous folks in South America and go through the trials that it takes to be ready to facilitate that type of ceremony. But some of the other types of allies that I work with that I mentioned earlier, mandrake, belladonna, things like that. I do sometimes share creations that I have made with those plant allies with others in ceremonial space. And it's serious. There's not only the physical harm that can come from choosing to ingest plants like that, but the journeying can be quite profound. I'd say in my top 5 most intense and transformational plant medicine journeys was actually with Atropa belladonna, which is known as deadly nightshade. And I ingested a tincture of that I had made. It had other herbs and things in it at the end of 2020 in December, and had a very intense journey that night. So I do not recommend this. I want to be really clear. Do not drink belladonna. There's a fine line between a shamanic experience like I had and ending up in the hospital. So just want to be really clear about that. So there's a lot to take into consideration. There's a huge responsibility if we're holding space for others in any type of ceremony that can induce these altered states of consciousness that we're speaking about today. Even if plant allies aren't part of the journey with us, I briefly mentioned earlier that there's a 4-day ceremony that I attend in upstate New York in the summer called Sun Moon Dance. And I'm in a mentorship program now to learn more about what it takes to facilitate a ceremony like that. So maybe someday, eventually, I will get to not only participate, but facilitate. And just the responsibility keeps coming back to me. These Saturnian lessons around maturation and knowing when to just hold space and witness someone in their suffering and the experience that they're having, and not intervene, because perhaps the entirety of their life has brought them to this moment and they need to have this experience. And from the outside, it can look like they're suffering a lot, and they probably are. And if we step in and intervene in ways that are not supportive of the process that they're in, we may be interrupting a really profound moment in their life. So that's a big part of facilitating any kind of ceremony, in my view, is knowing when to allow space for what's happening and to just hold it and be present and be solid, be that pillar, and knowing when someone actually does need a little bit of intervention or support or a hand on their body to let them know you're still here, you're okay, I'm here with you. So there's so much to this dance of the responsibility of holding space for others in these journeying spaces. And I would love to hear what the two of you think about this, of course.
Yeah, I'm so grateful for the attunement to the depth in potential that these experiences offer. And I think so much the holding, even in just that spatial way, is that permission and love from the outside that says, it's okay. It's okay to be here. We don't have to stop it. We don't have to, like you say, interrupt it. And the trust and the surrender to evolution of energy, trusting that the arc will transform. The minute we start to feel stuck, or that something's permanent, or that we're fixed in any way, we are outside of the flow of energy. And really the gift to deeply experience something so inward, but not being fully alone. It's really, really profound what community and our humanness offer ourselves, because that's a profoundly different experience than journeys someone might take in a walkabout sort of way. And I would love for you to speak a little bit more to the sun moon dance, Charlie, because I've always been so curious about what's embedded in our consciousness in ways that we've always known that we can mold and shift and brew our own shifting just in our beingness, whether through physical motion, activity, food, or lack thereof. And yeah, the inherent soul's desire to see beyond, to experience more, to not get, I think of what we might describe as reality as somewhat of a fixed state that's outside of that ebb and flow. And so the soul knowing, wait, I can't just stay here. I can't just be, Tansy as I've known her all my life. Like, oh, here's this beyond. And then I can enter into that flow in a much more broader sense rather than this fixated or fixed idea of reality. So yeah, I think it's just really powerful, that difference between holding space and over supporting or over intervening, really allowing someone to walk their path. Yeah.
Yeah, Charlie, I also want to hear more about the sun moon dance that you do. So I would love for you to share that.
Sure. So I was introduced to the practice by my partner, Isaiah, and he has been attending sun moon dance intermittently for over 25 years. So since he was in college, so he is an expert and recommended that I consider dancing. And so last summer was my second year of dancing. And sun moon dance was created by Joseph Rael, whose Native American name is Beautiful Painted Arrow. And he has written books and is an artist and an incredible human. So if you're not familiar with his work, definitely look him up. His last name is spelled Rael, and he is originated from a couple of tribes based in the Southwest here in the United States. So definitely recommend looking him up if you don't already know his work. And he received a lot of visions and very clear messages from spirit in the course of his life. He is still alive, but he's mostly retired now. I believe he's in his 70s or 80s. And one of the messages that he received from spirit was that he needed to create ceremonies and practices for people who are all people, not non-native exclusive ceremonies. So he very intentionally said, I would like to create ceremonies for any and everyone, men, women, non-binary, however you identify on that spectrum, you're welcome to dance. So that's contrasted from sun dance, which is a dance that's only danced by men. Sun moon dance, any gender identity is welcome to dance. And the practice consists of, from Friday evening until Monday afternoon, sleeping in a dance arbor, which is a circle outside. We do have a tarp over us, so if it rains at night, we don't get wet, but we're out in the elements. In the center of the dance arbor is a tree, and it's a tree that we have cut down the day before the ceremony. We have peeled some of the bark off so that we can expose the beautiful underlayer of the tree. We adorn and decorate it with bundles of tobacco and cornmeal and offerings and garlands, and we make it beautiful. And throughout the day, that whole weekend, we dance to and from the tree in one little lane from our sleeping space to the tree. We dance forward and then we dance backward. We don't generally turn around. You stay facing the tree at all times. During the weekend, we don't eat anything. We don't drink anything. We don't touch anyone. We don't talk to anyone. So it's a very intensive clearing process, clearing of our energy, clearing of our physical body. It's very demanding. It is quite hot and humid in upstate New York in late July, early August when the dance happens. So it can get up into the 90s during the day, and we're dancing. We're not drinking water. So by Sunday, as Rick, one of the facilitators, says, we are in a very holy state. I was hallucinating in the dance arbor on Sunday this year. I was watching clouds and seeing all kinds of beasts and monsters and dragons and getting a little scared, honestly, among other things. But It's a profound practice. The folks that facilitate it, their organization is called House of Mica, mica like the mineral, MICA. They've been facilitating Sun Moon Dance for over 25 years, or in the process of training the next generation of people who are interested in learning how to facilitate the dance, host the dance on their own property. So I'm studying with them in that regard. It's a profound ceremony. It's initiatory. It's life-changing. It's revelations happen, and it's a beautiful practice. And I'm happy to answer specific questions about it. It's very personal and very different for each person and each year, and it's really difficult. There's a lot of suffering for sure, as you might imagine. And some people's dance ends before Monday afternoon. Sometimes people are just done sooner. Either physically, they need to come out and drink some water and sleep in a bed, or spiritually, the timer kind of just goes off and they just sort of pop out. They're just not in ceremony anymore. So Rick and Elisa are incredibly adept at knowing when someone's dance is done, even if it's before the water ceremony on Monday afternoon. So it's an incredible practice, and definitely worth looking into if you're hearing this and you want to travel to New York in the summer. They always have space for dancers, so I definitely recommend it.
Thank you for sharing that, Charlie. And I'm sure, like, in the show notes, I'm going to give your details. So if anybody's interested in finding out more, they can maybe reach out to you, and I guess do some more research on their own. A question popped up as you were speaking to that, which also relates to just in general medicine ceremonies or ceremonies of any capacity that causes us to go into these deep places of suffering and initiation. And I think it's the sort of question that a lot of people who haven't come to medicine ask, or who've done it once and might ask, but why would you go back? Like, if you've done one ceremony, you've done one sun moon dance, why do more? Like, what are you trying to achieve, and what are you trying to process? Why do it?
Sometimes I ask myself this question, Tansy. Oh, I can't believe I'm here again. Why am I doing this? I'm gonna suffer a lot this weekend. I can feel it. It's a great question. Thank you for asking it. And for me, the answer is I just have an eternal yearning to go deeper and to continue growing. I don't ever want to stop that as long as this soul is in this body. I just crave it. I yearn for it. And I don't look forward to the suffering that I know is coming at all. I really dislike suffering. I think most of us do. And I think that just over the course of my life, I've come to see how valuable it can be, and what I can take from it when I get through it and come out on the other side. So I had this conversation with Isaiah just the other day, actually. It's just the column of items of why to do this and how it could potentially support me as a healer, as a priestess, as a ceremonial facilitator, as a mentor, as a teacher, like all these helping and healing capacities that I exist in my life. The reasons to have these experiences and the ways that they support me in healing and loving and supporting others and supporting Mother Earth, it far outweighs the suffering, which I know is temporary. And I don't know if this has been your experience with ayahuasca or other types of DMT, but the relationship with time in those altered states really changes. I've had ayahuasca ceremony experiences where I really thought that maybe it was never going to end. It felt like days had passed, and it had probably been an hour, maybe less. But there are these moments of uncertainty in these altered states of this will end eventually, right? The sun will come up and I will come back to myself, right? But you're not totally sure in those moments. But the conscious waking version of me knows that the suffering is temporary, and the benefit and the wisdom that lies on the other side of the experience is just, it's the reason to be alive. It's the reason that I'm alive. So I will continue to step up to these portals, these initiatory portals, and drink the medicine or forego food and water for 4 days in order to do this work, because I'm so deeply called to do it. And it's not for everyone.
Thank you. That was a wonderful response. And you also spoke to something that I would probably like to add to that is like when you are in that moment, when you are held in an experience that you think isn't going to end, to meet that and to understand why the fear is often there is the fear of getting stuck. And it's so hilarious because it's almost the opposite of what we normally fear, which is change. We fear, oh my gosh, like I don't want anything to change. I just want the stability. I don't want to go through that process. And that's often why we resist the death, resist the change. And that's why we kind of keep with the suffering, because we don't want to go through the change. But then in this place, when you're in that experience, you're like, oh my God, it's never going to move. It's never going to change. So it's kind of our relationship to time, and yeah, that relationship to change, to adjustment. And people think, oh my gosh, what if I'm going to be different when I come out? What if I'm not the same person? What if, and it's like all of these, like these assessments on like your own reality or an experience. It's like, well, you're always changing. Every time you go to sleep at night, it's like a mini death. That's what it used to be called. It's like the mini death. Because are you the same person that you were yesterday when you woke up? Could you be 100% sure? You willingly go off to sleep, and if you dream, it's like, where do you go? You are literally out for that long, and you've kind of gone on different adventures, and then you kind of come back and you land back in your body, and then you wake up, and you've had your own kind of little experience there, although there's not too much suffering unless you can't sleep. But that's the, of have a bad dream. But it's like we are constantly facing these times of transition and emerging. And so it's how can we be with transition? How can we be with suffering? How can we be with something that feels difficult? And I've always found that when I've been in an experience, like been in an altered state, and I feel like I can feel things starting to close in, and I can feel my chest starting to reach this like panic. And it's like, just let go, just, and I kind of consciously aware of my own fear, and then just like release and just trust and just be with. And then everything seems to flow from there. It's like everything then just sort of moves through, and it's almost confronting that fear within you. And so anyway, I wanted to add that to what you were saying, because it worked in unison.
It's beautiful, Tansy. You're in the field with me today. I was just thinking that letting go is such a profound part of all of these practices that we've named today, especially ayahuasca and my experience in September that I talked about earlier. My intention for that ceremony was to let go. And so the medicine said, okay, we can do that. I've observed patterns in myself and my life, and how I've processed trauma and just family dynamics and stuff. And I always thought that I had to be strong and stay in control and be very solar, be very yang. That had been kind of my approach. And there's so much power and there's so much wisdom and beauty in the letting go process, that, you know what, I don't need to be strong right now. Like, I'm in a safe space with people I love. I'm going to let it out. I'm going to sob and purge and do what I need to do, because I need to stop holding that stuff. And that is a courageous, beautiful, powerful act. It's very lunar. It's very yin. It's profound. So it's just shifted my whole way of thinking around how I deal with stress and fear and difficulty. And there are times to get mad and set boundaries and be fierce. And there are times to just surrender and just let it go. Just, okay, let the tears flow. Jackie said it earlier, tears are medicine. They're so healing. Crying is not weakness. So there's so much learning in these experiences.
You both speak so eloquently. I'm just in my own dream of receiving all of this wisdom and yeah, heart expansion that you're offering all of us. And yeah, it was spoken to me recently, but someone said strength is not rigid, it is supple. And it really changed my understanding of how we meet our own holding and not holding, stabilizing and surrendering, and really allowing that flow to be there. And when I think of that supple quality, like suppleness can receive and it can also offer, and just that willingness to be in the river, the river sticks, like to trust it and not try to swim upstream so hard. And that's the holding that I feel deeper and deeper too, just within the cosmos and within, living life. And it's profound to choose. That question Tansy, postulated, why do you come back? And to me, that's part of where I'm at in my exploration, is it's profound to choose intentionally walking and getting on that boat with Hermes to go down into the underworld, in addition to all the way that life, tugs and pulls at us, in ways that we might not consciously choose, but that shows up, and we're on that ride. So yeah, I think there's, profound experience there. And as you said, not for everyone. We're a living organism of different needs and desires and strengths and wisdom and expansion. And how can we just all hold each other with that much more love and grace, regardless of what our path ends up being. I'm just so grateful for both of you in this conversation today.
Well, I am very grateful for you both as well. This has been such a lovely conversation, and just so rich and flowing, I feel. We're in the flow. And I really wanted to talk about journeying, but I think that we've maybe reached our time, so it's possibly something we could come back and talk about. I would love to do this again. So do either of you have anything that you want to say before I sort of close down?
I'm happy to hear from folks. If anybody has questions about anything I spoke about today, please reach out.
So Charlie, if you want to give a little bit, just you can say, like, if you have a website or if you have any classes, courses, how people can reach you.
Absolutely. So my website is esotericsocialmedia.com. I do social media for astrologers and other occult practitioners, but there's also information on that website about how to book an astrology session with me, how to contact me, so folks can find me there. And then Isaiah and I's partnership and the teaching that we do together, we call that the Inner Circle IC for Isaiah and Charlie, but IC is also a very potent part of the astrology chart, so it's kind of a play on words. So you can find us on Instagram and Facebook under the Inner Circle IC.
Wonderful. Thank you. And Jacqueline, how can people find you?
Yeah, you can reach me on my website, which is Two Roots Acupuncture, and that's all spelled out. So TWOROOTS acupuncture.com, and all of my contact information for my astrology offerings and soul chemical sessions are on there as well.
Thank you. And I will put in the show notes those website details as well for anyone who's watching or listening. And I can be found, I'm not going to do a closing today, I don't think, so I'll say mine here. I can be found at tansyalexandra.com, and I am a holistic guide, counselor, tarot reader, but you should all know that, so you can reach me there. But thank you everyone for watching today, and please do feel free to like, subscribe, share with your friends, and follow the channel so that you can watch more of these videos if you're on YouTube, or just follow us on Spotify if that's where you're watching and listening rather, on Apple Podcasts. And please do feel free to leave a review if you are enjoying these. And I just want to say thank you so much. This has been such a pleasure. So thank you.
Thank you, Tansy and Jackie, for holding such beautiful space for profound conversations. I'm honored to have been here with you today. So thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you, ladies.